What would you do if your greatest act of love was erased and handed to someone else as a gift? At a sun-drenched family barbecue in Vermont, I thought I was celebrating my sister's happiness. Instead, I discovered the cruel truth. My parents gave away the family home, my home, to my sister as a wedding gift, without a single word to me. They called it generosity. I called it betrayal. But here's what they didn't know. For 5 silent years, I had been paying that mortgage every single month. This is the story of how I reclaimed my dignity, one boundary at a time. They always said I was the responsible one. At 35, I'd built a quiet, structured life for myself. I'm Elizabeth Harper, a pharmacist in Montpelier, Vermont. I own a modest 2-bedroom condo with a view of Lake Champlain, keep my garden tidy, and show up to work 10 minutes early every day. I never missed a family birthday, paid my student loans in full, and every Thanksgiving I baked the pies from scratch. Pumpkin and pecan, no store-bought crusts allowed. I didn't scream for attention. I showed up. That's who I've always been. So when my parents, Thomas and Linda, asked me to help with a mortgage on their old Victorian house after Dad's back surgery and Mom's early retirement, I didn't hesitate. They were too proud to ask outright, so I offered. I'll cover the payments, I told them quietly, one chilly January night over tea, just until things get better. They never really did, but I kept paying. 5 years. $2,100 every month. I never told anyone, not even my sister Sarah. Sarah, my little sister with the halo smile and reckless laugh. She was the golden child, not because she asked to be, but because our parents polished her pedestal every chance they got. When she crashed her first car, they called it a learning experience. When I got straight A's and a promotion at work, they said, "That's nice, dear." Still, I loved her. I still do, in a complicated way. Which brings us to the barbecue. It was one of those perfect late summer Saturdays in Vermont. Maple trees just starting to blush red, charcoal smoke curling in the air. We gathered in the backyard of our childhood home for Sarah and Brandon's post-wedding celebration, my parents' idea of a casual blessing party. I arrived with a fruit salad, a bottle of Riesling, and a quiet ache in my back from another 12-hour shift at the pharmacy. I didn't mind. Family comes first, right? That belief shattered just past 3 p.m. when Aunt Marie, who has never mastered the concept of discretion, raised her wine glass and said, "Well, I think it's just so lovely of your parents to give you the house." A real fresh start. The house? I froze. My fork hovered midair. "Wait, what?" I asked, the words barely audible over the hum of conversation and cicadas. Sarah blinked at me. "Oh, I thought you knew." "What house?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even as the world tilted slightly on its axis. "The house," she said, gesturing around. "Mom and Dad gifted it to us. As a wedding present. Isn't it wild?" Wild. That was one word for it. My stomach dropped. My parents, who had accepted my silent financial lifeline for half a decade, had handed over the deed to my sister without a single word to me, like it was theirs to give. Like I was a stranger at this table. I stood there in the backyard of the home I had been secretly paying for, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. Everyone kept eating. Only I had stopped. I wish I could say I made a scene, threw my lemonade in someone's face, demanded answers, flipped the card table and walked away like a woman in one of those justice-fueled dramas. But that's not what happened. Instead, I stood there with a spoonful of melon suspended in midair and a polite smile frozen on my lips like a bad wax statue. I heard someone laugh, maybe Brandon's cousin, and the sound felt like static against my skin. Sarah had already turned back to the conversation like nothing monumental had just detonated in front of me. Gifted. The word rang in my head like a cruel bell. My parents' house gifted to her. I blinked, searching for something solid. My mother was by the grill with Uncle Henry, adjusting her apron and laughing like it was just another sunny Saturday. My father sat on a folding chair nearby, sipping his beer with that familiar, distant look, the one he always wore when things got uncomfortable. They knew. They all knew. I sat down on the nearest lawn chair before my knees gave out. The plastic creaked under my weight. A few feet away, Sarah's new husband Brandon, tech entrepreneur, always a little too smug, held court with some guests, telling a story about their honeymoon plans. Greece first, then Tuscany, he was saying. We might extend it, depending on how much we can rent this place out for on Airbnb. Rent this place? I gripped the sides of the chair. My nails dug into the woven plastic. They were planning to profit off it. I couldn't feel my hands. Elizabeth, dear, Aunt Marie's voice pierced the fog. You didn't know? Oh, sweetheart, I thought surely they told you. But you're always so private. Maybe they assumed, well, I don't know. She laughed nervously and handed me a paper plate with a heap of coleslaw I didn't remember asking for. I stared at it. Then, at her. Oh, look at me, she said, flapping her napkin. Running my mouth again? I stood up. I couldn't breathe in that lawn chair, in that backyard, under that sun that suddenly felt way too hot. My feet moved before my brain caught up. I found my mother by the grill, smiling at a joke she hadn't really heard. She turned toward me with a cheery, Lizzie, try the grilled peaches. They came out just right. I didn't answer. Instead, I asked, softly, because I still hadn't found my anger, when were you going to tell me? Her smile faltered. Tell you what, sweetheart? I tilted my head, the way I used to as a child when I couldn't figure out if she was playing dumb or just being careless. About the house. Oh, Elizabeth, she sighed. She glanced around as if checking to see who might be listening. Let's not do this here, okay? It's Sarah's day. Of course it was. It was always Sarah's day. I turned to my father. Dad? He wouldn't look at me, just cleared his throat and said, it made sense. She's settling down, starting a family, and I've been paying the mortgage. The words were out before I could catch them. My mother's eyes widened slightly. What? I said it again, louder this time. I've been covering the mortgage for 5 years. They both stared at me like I'd grown a second head. I wasn't supposed to say it. I was supposed to be quiet and good and generous. But the words spilled out anyway, fast and raw and irreversible. Every single month, while Sarah backpacked through Europe and you redecorated the guest room. I didn't ask for recognition. I didn't even ask for thanks. But this? My mother touched my arm. Sweetheart, don't make a scene. I'm not making a scene, I said, stepping back. I'm stating facts. Sarah wandered over just then, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. What's going on? I looked at her, my sister, who once shared my Barbie dolls and snuck into my room to borrow my sweaters. The girl I protected from bullies and helped with college essays. The one I once believed would never, ever hurt me on purpose. You knew, I said. Didn't you? She bit her lip, then shrugged. Mom and Dad said it was theirs to give. I assumed you were okay with it. That did it. Of course I wasn't okay with it. You took the house I paid for and called it a gift. Brandon appeared beside her, wrapping a possessive arm around her waist. Maybe this isn't the time, Elizabeth. You're kind of killing the vibe. I almost laughed. The vibe. I didn't say another word. I turned and walked toward the front of the house. As I passed the porch swing, I saw my old initials carved into the wood. E.H. 10 years old. I had sanded and stained that swing one summer when Dad's back went out. I remembered thinking then that someday, maybe I'd inherit this place. Not for the walls or the porch or the kitchen with its clunky tile, but for the memories. But apparently, memories don't earn you deeds. Only silence does. I don't remember the drive home. I must have taken the long way, because the sun was dipping low when I pulled into my driveway. My beach house, the one place that still felt untouched. Mine. I killed the engine and sat there in the silence, my hands curled around the steering wheel, until the pressure in my chest began to throb. No one had followed me. No one had called. Not even Sarah. I walked inside, kicked off my sandals, and went straight to the kitchen. I poured a glass of wine. Then, another. It tasted like nothing. I wasn't angry yet. That would come later. Right now, I was floating in this strange, weightless sadness, like I'd just watched someone else's life slip through my fingers. The house they gave away was more than wood and brick. It was the fireplace I helped repair when I was 25, and Dad couldn't afford the mason. The attic I cleaned every spring. The The leaky faucet I fixed twice. The payments I made, always on time, even when it meant skipping dinners out or postponing vacations. My name wasn't on the deed, but I carried that house like a second job. And now, it belonged to Sarah. Sarah, who had never made a mortgage payment in her life. Sarah, who never even liked that house. She used to call it the old ghost box. Sarah, who giggled when Brandon said he might list it on Airbnb to fund their third honeymoon leg. I took another sip of wine and finally let myself speak out loud. I was invisible. It felt strange to say, but truer than anything. I had been invisible for 5 years. The dutiful daughter, the quiet support beam. No one notices until it cracks. My parents had used my silence to tell themselves stories, that they were still the ones holding things together, that they were generous to gift something they no longer had any claim to. That I didn't mind, but I did. And I minded even more when I remembered what Mom had said. Let's not do this here. It's Sarah's day. Every day was Sarah's day. And now, apparently, so was my sacrifice. The next morning, I woke with a dull ache in my chest and a hangover I hadn't earned. I made coffee, sat on the porch, and tried to convince myself it was all some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe they hadn't understood what I'd been doing all these years. Maybe they didn't realize how much I'd paid. But that wasn't true. They knew I'd been sending the money. Mom had cried on the phone when I first offered. "Are you sure, sweetheart? It's such a lot." And when I said yes, she had whispered thank you, like it was a prayer. And then nothing. No mention since, as if silence could cover the debt. That afternoon, I received a text from Mom. "Hope you're feeling better. Let's talk soon. Maybe dinner this week? Love you." I stared at it, the bubble of rage finally surfacing. Dinner? She wanted to have dinner? No acknowledgement, no explanation. Just a gentle pat on the head and a hope I'd fall back into place like I always did. Not this time. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out the folder where I'd kept all the bank statements. Every wire transfer, every canceled check, every email confirming payment from the bank. 5 years, over $125,000. I snapped photos of them all, not to post, not yet, but because I needed proof, for myself. I hadn't imagined it. I wasn't overreacting. I had paid, I had sacrificed, I had given, and they had taken, silently, willingly, as if I were a ghost they could walk right through. 3 days passed before they knocked. I'd gone to work like normal, dispensing medications, advising on dosages, smiling politely at customers who had no idea I was a threadbare version of myself. But when I came home that Thursday, just as the ocean breeze was slipping cool through the porch screens, I saw them, my parents, Thomas and Linda Harper, standing on my front steps with reusable grocery bags and forced smiles like they were dropping by for tea. I stopped in my tracks. They looked surprised to see me, as if this wasn't my home. My father offered a tentative wave, and my mother lifted a hand as if she'd knock again, though they'd clearly already made themselves comfortable. "Elizabeth," Mom began brightly, as if nothing had happened. "You're home early?" I didn't answer, just walked up slowly, gripping the strap of my bag until my knuckles whitened. "What are you doing here?" I asked. They glanced at each other, then down at the bags at their feet. "We brought a few things," Dad said. "Linens, pantry staples. We figured we'd help settle in." "Settle in?" Mom's smile froze. "Well, just until we find something permanent. The big house is a bit much for Sarah to manage alone now that she's married, and we've been talking about downsizing for years anyway. We thought, given how quiet it is out here." She trailed off, waiting for me to nod along. I didn't. My breath hitched somewhere between a laugh and a gasp. "You're moving in?" My father cleared his throat. "Just for a little while. A few weeks, maybe, until we figure out what's next." "Did Sarah suggest this?" I asked. Mom shook her head quickly. No, she didn't want to inconvenience you. But you have a space, and you're always so independent. So you assumed I'd say yes. They said nothing. And in their silence, something inside me hardened. 5 years of covering their mortgage. Years of quiet sacrifice. Of letting them believe I was self-sufficient enough to require nothing, so they could give everything to Sarah and still sleep at night. And now, after signing over my childhood home without asking, they wanted me to house them. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. They started to follow. "No," I said, without turning around. They froze. Mom's voice trembled. "Elizabeth, don't be like this. We're family." So was that house. That was different. Dad said, low and tired. She's starting her life. And I'm what? A placeholder? The silence that followed was the most honest answer they'd ever given me. I won't have this conversation now, I said, stepping fully inside and closing the door behind me. I didn't slam it. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was choosing peace over performance. But the weight of the door as it clicked shut felt like the punctuation to a sentence I'd never dared say out loud. No more. I watched from the kitchen window as they stood on the porch, not knowing what to do. Eventually, they picked up their bags and left, slowly, like people leaving a party they hadn't realized they weren't invited to. That night, I texted my neighbor, Jude, a retired math teacher and part-time vigilante when it came to property rules. Heads up, my parents might try to move in. If they show up again, feel free to call me or the police. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji and, don't worry, I've got binoculars and no patience. God bless Jude. The next morning, I found one of the grocery bags left on the porch. Inside, a set of monogrammed towels and a frozen lasagna. No note. Just an assumption. I set the lasagna on the counter and stared at it. It thawed slowly, like the last remnants of my willingness to be the good daughter. The voicemail came during my lunch break. Elizabeth, it's Mom. We stopped by this morning, just to tidy up and drop off a few things. You must have already left for work. We'll try again tomorrow. Love you. I stared at my phone. Tidy up? My stomach twisted. I hadn't missed work that morning. I'd simply left earlier than usual, needing time to clear my head. And in those few extra hours, my parents had entered my house. Without my knowledge, without my consent. I checked the front door footage from my security camera. Thank God for Jude and his obsession with neighborhood safety, who had helped me set it up last fall. There they were. 9:14 a.m. Mom with her choreless clipboard. Dad with his utility box like he was fixing a faucet. They had a key. Of course they did. I had given it to them years ago. Back when boundaries were a suggestion, not a necessity. But that was before they gifted my contributions away and tried to crawl into my life like nothing had changed. I raced home, heart pounding with a nausea that felt deeper than anger. I pulled into the driveway and saw the evidence like a crime scene in broad daylight. The storm door propped open, a mop drying on the porch, trash bags neatly stacked near the bin. They'd tried to make it look helpful, generous, like a favor. Inside, I found folded linens on my guest bed, a fresh bar of soap in the bathroom, a casserole in the fridge I hadn't put there. My mother's handwriting on a sticky note, figured you'd be too busy to cook. And on the kitchen table, a stack of mail, some of it mine, some of it addressed to them. Forwarded here, apparently. They weren't moving in. They had already moved. I called Jude. Yep, he confirmed. Saw your mom come back with a small suitcase around 11. Thought maybe you were letting her stay a night. No, I said, feeling my throat tighten. I didn't. It wasn't just the invasion of space. It was the assumption that my silence meant surrender, that politeness could be reinterpreted as permission, that if they came early enough and stayed quiet enough, I'd fold like I always had. But I wasn't folding. Not this time. I changed the locks that evening. It cost $300 and a conversation with a locksmith who tried to make small talk about family visiting. I nodded, smiled, signed the receipt. By sunset, they couldn't get back in. I left their suitcase and toiletries neatly boxed on the front porch, just like they had done with their guilt. I typed out a message and stared at it for several minutes before hitting send. I came home to find my house entered without permission. I've changed the locks. Any future entry attempts will be treated as trespassing. You are not welcome to stay here. Please respect my boundaries. It was a text I'd rehearsed for years without knowing I needed to. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. Then came the texts. My mother first. We were only trying to help. You've always been so generous, Elizabeth. We thought you'd understand. Then my father. This is an overreaction. You're making a scene over nothing. And finally, inevitably, Sarah. Are you serious? You locked them out? You're acting like a landlord with strangers, not their daughter. Strangers? No, worse. They weren't strangers. Strangers don't know which door creaks or how you take your coffee. Strangers can't betray you like this. Only family can. That night, Jude called. Hope you don't mind, he said. But when I saw your dad shaking the door handle, I called the cops. Figured it was better safe than sorry. They didn't? They left before the squad car got here. But the officer said next time, it's a clear enough case for trespass. I thanked him, then sat in the dark for a long while. This wasn't how family was supposed to feel, but it was finally the truth. And the truth, for all its mess, was better than living like a doormat with a do not disturb sign on her heart. It was a Thursday afternoon when the call came. I was midway through consulting an elderly patient about her new blood pressure meds when my phone buzzed inside my coat pocket. I ignored it, finishing the explanation with my usual steady tone, but something about the timing left a pebble of unease in my gut. I checked the screen on my break. 2 missed calls, both from an unknown number with a local area code. Then a voicemail. Hello, this is Officer Bryant with the Shelburne Police Department. We received a report from Thomas and Linda Harper regarding a possible eviction situation at a residence on Driftwood Lane. They claim they were locked out without prior notice. Please call back as soon as possible. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Locked out? Without notice? My parents had reported me. I stepped outside, letting the breeze off the lake sting my skin while I dialed the number back. The officer picked up after 2 rings. Officer Bryant speaking. This is Elizabeth Harper. I just got your message. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for calling. Your parents, Mr. and Mrs. Harper, came into the station earlier today. They claimed they had been living at your residence and were locked out without warning. I laughed. I couldn't help it. It was one of those hollow, disbelieving sounds, the kind that slips out when reality becomes almost too ridiculous to name. I assume they didn't mention they were never invited to stay in the first place? I asked, working hard to keep my voice even. There was a pause. That's what I wanted to clarify. Are they tenants? Was there ever a rental agreement? No, I said. No agreement, no rent, no invitation. They entered while I was at work and began moving things in. I changed the locks. That's it. Do you have proof they weren't living there? I nearly choked. Officer, they have a different mailing address. I own the property. No lease. No utilities in their name. And I have a security camera showing the timeline of their arrival, bags in hand, after I'd already declined a conversation about them staying. Would you like the footage? Another pause. No need. That matches the details on file. Honestly, they didn't seem eager to pursue a legal case. They seemed more upset you didn't discuss it as a family, as they put it. Of course they did. They weren't looking for justice. They were looking for narrative control. Understood, I said. And just to be clear, I don't want them entering my home again. If they try, I will file a formal trespass complaint. We'll note that. Thank you for your time, Miss Harper. After I hung up, I stood there for a long moment, letting the wind carry away what was left of my restraint. They hadn't come to talk. They had gone to the police. And for what? Because I dared to set a boundary? Because I refused to let their choices devour what little was still mine? I got back to work late, apologizing to my manager, who, bless her, only squeezed my shoulder and said, "Take a few minutes if you need to. Some things are more important than clock time." That night, I received a text from Sarah. Seriously? Cops? Over mom and dad trying to stay a few nights? Do you even hear how petty you sound? I didn't reply. She wasn't trying to understand. She never had. Instead, I opened the file I'd quietly built over the past week. Digital copies of bank statements, proof of every mortgage payment I'd made toward the house they now called Sarah's gift. I wasn't ready to use them yet, but they were mine. Truth stitched in numbers. Let them lie to each other. I had the receipts. That night, I sat on my porch with a mug of tea and watched the stars peek through the clouds. Jude came out across the street, waved, and then, seeing my expression, gave a knowing nod and disappeared back into his house. The sky was quiet, but below it, everything was shifting. The email subject line read, "Notice of intent to pursue civil action. Brandon A. Greer." At first, I thought it was a scam, but when I clicked, my heart sank. It was real. A PDF letter, written on the letterhead of some boutique legal firm I'd never heard of, outlining Brandon's intention to sue me for undue emotional distress and housing-related disruption. It cited vague terms like harassment and unsafe eviction circumstances and listed me by full legal name. Apparently, locking out my parents, his in-laws, had caused him and Sarah heightened stress, loss of emotional security, and undue hardship due to concerns over the family's future inheritance. I laughed. Once. Dry. Then I got up, walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and sat down at the table where I had made those first mortgage payments 5 years ago. Where I had believed family was something to protect, not something to defend yourself from. Brandon was suing me over his feelings about a house I didn't gift, over boundaries he wasn't even a part of. I forwarded the email to Ethan, Maya's boyfriend. 10 minutes later, he called. "Don't panic," he said calmly. "It's an intimidation letter, not a filed lawsuit. They're testing to see if you'll flinch." "I'm not flinching," I said, "but I'm furious." "Good," he said. "Now let's hit back." Ethan offered to connect me with a forensic accountant he trusted, a woman named Lila with the tenacity of a bloodhound and the ethics of a saint. I agreed without hesitation. If Brandon and Sarah wanted to open the door to legal scrutiny, I'd shove it wide open. We met that weekend. Layla was in her early 40s, wore tortoiseshell glasses, and didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I'll need access to your financial records, mortgage statements, and any documentation showing your contributions to the family home," she said. I handed her a flash drive and a thick file of printed records. "I've kept everything," I said. She smiled. "Good. Most people don't. But you strike me as the type who cleans before the cleaner arrives." I blinked. "That's alarmingly accurate." "I'm going to find out where every dollar went," she said. "And if there's more than we expect, you'll be the first to know." What I didn't tell her, what I hadn't told anyone yet, was that I had a creeping suspicion there was more. Because despite 5 years of paying the mortgage, something had never added up. The amount they'd asked me for, it had always seemed just a little too round, a little too tidy. A few days later, Lila called. "Elizabeth," she said, her voice sharper than before. "We found something." My heart dropped. "It's a trust fund," she said. "Established 22 years ago, originally in your name. Your parents were the custodians until it matured." "I don't understand." "You should have had access to it by your 30th birthday, but records show they quietly dissolved it. Transferred the contents to an account in Sarah's name 2 years ago." "I didn't speak. I couldn't." "They've been using your money," she said gently. "In addition to your mortgage payments, you were funding your sister's future from both ends." The silence that followed was vast, cold, hollow. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I will be," I whispered, "but not tonight." We hung up. I stared at the walls of my home, walls I had paid for, earned, maintained, and felt them shift, not physically, but emotionally. They no longer felt like a sanctuary. They felt like evidence. And Sarah knew. She had to. No one gets handed a secret trust fund by accident. The betrayal felt surgical now, clean-cut, intentional. It wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was theft. And I was done letting it happen. That night, I sat at my desk and drafted a countersuit. With Ethan's help, I began the process of legally responding to Brandon's claim and adding my own. Not just for emotional distress, but for financial fraud, property misrepresentation, and breach of fiduciary responsibility by my own parents. I wasn't bluffing. If they wanted war, I'd meet them in court, with receipts in both hands and 5 years of silence finally broken. The courthouse smelled like dust and tension. It wasn't a full trial yet, just the preliminary hearing to determine whether Brandon's ridiculous emotional distress claim held any legal weight. But I felt like I was walking into battle, dressed not in armor but in a navy blouse and flats I'd bought years ago for Sarah's engagement dinner. Funny, how often I'd dressed up for moments that would later betray me. Ethan walked beside me, briefcase in hand, every bit the cool-headed legal professional. Layla was already inside, her expression unreadable but her presence grounding. I wasn't alone this time. That mattered. The hearing room was small, sterile. Brandon sat with his lawyer at one table, smirking like this was a game he'd already won. Sarah wasn't with him. That struck me as odd. My parents were absent too, for once. I sat with Ethan and tried not to wring my hands. When the judge entered, the room settled into quiet. She looked seasoned, tired maybe, but sharp. "Mr. Greer," she said, peering over her glasses, "your claim cites emotional distress and disruption of family housing stability. What exactly are you basing this on?" Brandon's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client and his wife were relying on a family property transfer that was destabilized by the respondent's abrupt eviction of her parents, leading to mental strain and uncertainty regarding their own future living arrangements. The judge blinked. So he's upset about his in-laws being asked to leave a house they didn't own or rent? Yes, Your Honor. It was deeply distressing. And where does the respondent come into this? Well, the lawyer faltered slightly. Ms. Harper changed the locks and... Ethan stood. With legal cause, Your Honor. The home is solely owned by my client. There was no agreement, verbal or written, granting anyone else residency. Moreover, we have evidence that her parents attempted to move in without consent during working hours, using a key they were no longer authorized to use. He turned to hand over the security footage and emails. The judge flipped through the documents. Mr. Greer, she said flatly, do you live at this property? No, Your Honor, he muttered. Have you ever paid rent, mortgage, or utilities there? No. And you're claiming emotional distress because your in-laws were not allowed to stay in someone else's house? Brandon glanced at his lawyer. I'm going to save everyone some time, the judge said. This suit is being dismissed. There is no legal basis for the plaintiff's claim. Further attempts to intimidate through court process will be noted. Ethan sat down, satisfied. Brandon's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. As he gathered his papers, I thought that might be it, that we'd all leave and the next round would wait for another day. But then the judge looked at me. Ms. Harper, she said gently, do you intend to pursue any legal actions in return? I glanced at Ethan. He nodded once, subtle but sure. Yes, Your Honor, I said. I intend to file a countersuit for financial fraud and misappropriation of trust assets, and I have documentation to support that claim. A hush fell over the room. Brandon froze. His face turned a shade paler. Very well, the judge said, flipping her notes. File the motion formally. We'll set a date. Outside the courtroom, Layla turned to me. That pause? She said. When you spoke, that was the moment he realized you know. Know what? That he's been benefiting from your money for years. And now, you're holding the receipt. I should have felt triumphant, but I didn't. I felt tired. Exposing your family comes with a cost, even when they've spent years treating you like the extra in their story. Later that night, I sat alone on my porch, the breeze wrapping around me like a secret. My phone buzzed. A text. From Sarah. I didn't know about the trust fund. I swear. Can we talk? I stared at it. She hadn't shown up to court, but now that the cracks were showing, she wanted to talk. I didn't respond. Not yet. Some wounds deserve silence before they earn forgiveness. I didn't reply to Sarah's text for 3 days. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I needed time to figure out if I could bear hearing more half-truths. I'd spent most of my adult life editing my expectations of her, softening every selfish moment with a sisterly excuse. She's younger. She's just under pressure. She doesn't know better. But now I knew better. About all of them. And the version of Sarah who stood beside Brandon as he tried to sue me, I wasn't sure that woman even remembered who I was. When I finally texted back, it was short. We can meet. Neutral place. 1 hour. I choose. We met at a cafe across town. One with little chance of running into anyone who knew us or our families unraveling. She arrived late, as usual. No apology. Just Sarah. Messy bun, sunglasses too big, and that hesitant smile that used to melt every consequence into forgiveness. But I didn't smile back. She slid into the chair across from me and clutched a paper coffee cup like it was armor. You look tired, she said. So do you. We stared at each other for a moment, the way sisters sometimes do when they're trying to recognize the girl they once shared bunk beds with. I meant what I said, she murmured. About the trust. I didn't know. I raised an eyebrow. You never thought to ask where the honeymoon money came from? Or the down payment? Or why Brandon's business had a sudden cushion while Mom and Dad were supposedly broke? She looked away. They told me Dad refinanced. Said it was a legacy move. I assumed. You didn't want to know, I cut in. That's what this was, Sarah. You didn't want to know if someone was paying your way, as long as it wasn't you. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't flinch. I wasn't cruel. I was just done pretending. I don't blame you for being angry, she whispered. But I didn't think it would go this far. I leaned forward. You mean me fighting back? Going to court? Exposing what Mom and Dad did? She nodded slowly. Maybe, I said, my voice low, if any of you had stopped to ask how I felt for even 5 minutes, none of this would have happened. Sarah wiped her eyes. Her hands trembled slightly. I thought you liked being the strong one. My chest tightened. I didn't like it, I said. I survived because no one else would step up, and you all mistook endurance for endlessness. She winced. I know now. When Brandon filed that stupid suit, I told him not to, but he thought it would scare you. It did, I admitted. At first. Until Lila found the trust. Then I realized how deep it went. She exhaled shakily. He didn't know about it either. I swear. When I told him what you found, he panicked. Because he saw the end of the free ride. Sarah looked up, wounded. That's not fair, isn't it? I asked. He's not the one who offered to pay back what I covered. He's not the one sitting here right now asking how to make this right. Silence. Then, quietly, what can I do? I wanted to believe that she meant it, that this wasn't just damage control. But trust isn't a faucet. You don't just twist it open again. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe start by telling the truth, to everyone, about what you knew, about what they took. Sarah looked down at her hands. If I do that, they'll hate me. They already do, I said gently. They just call it loyalty. She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. You were always the better one. No, I replied. I was just quiet longer. We sat in silence until the server brought the check. I paid for both, because I didn't want to owe her anything, not even coffee. As we stood to leave, she touched my arm. If I tell the truth, will you forgive me? I might, I said, holding her gaze. But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. She nodded, tears threatening again. But this time, I didn't look away. That night, I received an email from Ethan. Attached was a transcript of Sarah's statement, filed through her attorney, confirming the details of the trust fund transfer and her awareness of the financial misappropriation, delivered voluntarily. It wasn't everything, but it was a beginning, one that might just shift the judge's perception in our favor, and maybe, just maybe, begin to shift mine too. I didn't dress for revenge. I dressed for closure. Black slacks, a soft gray blouse, and the silver locket my grandmother once gave me, the one Sarah tried to borrow and lost when we were teenagers. It felt like armor somehow, a quiet kind, a symbol of who I'd been before all this. The courtroom was more crowded than before. Word had spread, not to the press, thank God, but through the town's well-oiled gossip lines. A family imploding over a house and a secret trust fund? People pretended to be shocked, but in a town this size, people knew, even if they'd never said it out loud. I sat with Ethan and Lila, watching Brandon fidget across the aisle. Sarah wasn't seated beside him. She sat behind us instead, alone, arms crossed, eyes focused on the floor. I didn't turn around to acknowledge her. Not yet. The judge entered, and all chatter died. She shuffled some papers, then looked at me. Ms. Harper, you allege financial misappropriation by your parents, who are not present. Do you wish to proceed without them? Yes, Your Honor, I said. They've been served. Their absence speaks for itself. Very well. Lila stood, calm, composed, unshakable. She presented the trail of mortgage payments from my account to the house, now legally owned by Sarah. She presented the trust fund dissolution and the quiet transfer to Sarah's financial accounts, timed, notably, just months before my parents stopped paying their own bills. She explained how the numbers, the transfers, and the timelines painted one clear picture. I wasn't just a supportive daughter. I was a hidden financier, siphoned dry behind closed doors. When Layla sat down, the room was still. Even Brandon had stopped tapping his pen. Then the judge spoke. Does the defense have anything to add? Brandon's lawyer stood, shifting nervously. Given the new statement from Ms. Greer, he nodded toward Sarah, we withdraw our previous objections. We submit no further argument. And just like that, the performance ended. The judge reviewed her notes, her voice steady, but edged with quiet authority. Elizabeth Harper, she said, This court acknowledges your financial contribution to the family estate and the subsequent concealment and misallocation of your funds through improper channels. She turned a page. Based on the documentation and the voluntary statement submitted by Sarah Greer, I find in your favor. You are entitled to full restitution of $143,700 plus court fees and damages. Any future claim to shared assets by your sister or parents is hereby nullified. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I just closed my eyes for a breath and let the moment settle into my bones. After all this time, someone believed me. Outside the courthouse, Sarah caught up with me. "I didn't do it for you," she said, avoiding my gaze. "I did it because I couldn't carry the lie anymore." I nodded. "That's fair." We stood in silence. She looked older than usual, less polished, more real. "I'll wire your share of the trust," she said. "What's left of it?" "You don't have to." "I do." I didn't hug her. We weren't there yet. Maybe we'd never be. But as she walked away, I didn't feel that old ache anymore, the one that begged to be seen, because I'd seen myself now, and I'd made the world see me too. Spring arrived slow and sweet that year. I planted daffodils outside the porch, something I hadn't done in seasons, not because I hadn't wanted to, but because I hadn't had the space, the quiet, the self, to do it. The restitution money came in April. I didn't spend it, not right away. I opened a separate account, labeled it Future Mine, and smiled every time I saw the balance. My parents sent a letter, not a call, not a visit, just 3 pages of apologies, guilt, and soft rewrites of history. But in the last paragraph, they said something that finally rang honest. "We didn't see you, not really, but we're starting to." I allowed them supervised visits, short ones, public, structured. That, too, was a form of forgiveness, not for who they were, but for who I needed to become without their weight on my back. Sarah had the baby in June. She named her Hope. We aren't close, but sometimes she sends photos. "And sometimes," I reply, "but my favorite moments now aren't the ones where I'm needed or praised. They're the quiet ones. A sunset with tea, a wind chime I installed on the porch, a feeling in my chest that says, I'm not invisible anymore." I stood up for myself, and in doing so, I finally found the woman no one else had bothered to see. Have you ever found strength in standing alone? Let me know in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, please like and subscribe, because someone out there needs to know it's okay to put yourself first. And maybe, just maybe, they'll see this and finally feel seen too. Thank you for listening.